The radio crackled with static and fear. Somewhere in the mountains of northern Kandahar, 37 soldiers were pinned down in a valley that had no name on any map. The Taliban had them surrounded on three sides, mortars raining down every 40 seconds like clockwork. The fourth side was a sheer rock face 200 feet high. Captain Marcus Holloway pressed his back against the frozen earth and keyed his radio one more time. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Any station, this is Viper 2-1. We are combat ineffective and taking casualties. How copy? Silence answered him, then static. Then a voice he didn't recognize, calm and almost bored. Viper 2-1, Hog 1-7, I copy all, what's your grid? Holloway rattled off the coordinates, his breath fogging in the thin air. There was a pause on the other end, longer than he liked. Then the voice came back. Viper, be advised, that's inside the no-fly perimeter. Colonel's orders. Nothing goes in without clearance. Holloway closed his eyes. Around him, men were bleeding into the dirt. Private Yusuf had taken shrapnel to the leg. Sergeant Danes was holding pressure on a sucking chest wound, his face pale as snow. The mortars kept coming, 40 seconds, 39, 38. Hog 1-7, we don't have time for clearance. We need fire support now or we're not walking out of here. Another pause. When the voice returned, it had changed. Not louder, not harder, just different. Viper 2-1, stand by. Hog 1-7 is inbound. Holloway didn't know who was flying that A-10. He didn't know her call sign came from a mistake she made 6 years ago in a training sortie over Nevada when she froze for 3 seconds on a gun run, and her squadron nicknamed her Hesitation. He didn't know she'd flown 73 combat missions without a single decoration because her superiors thought she was too cautious, too methodical, too soft for close air support. He didn't know she'd been passed over for promotion twice. All he knew was that somewhere above the clouds an aircraft was coming, and in 18 minutes the no-fly perimeter was going to mean nothing at all. The mountains held their breath, the mortars kept falling, and Major Alara Voss pushed the throttle forward, her gloved hand steady on the stick, her eyes on the coordinates burning into her heads-up display. She'd heard the fear in that captain's voice. She'd done the math. 37 men. One narrow valley, no other aircraft in range. The colonel had said no. But the colonel wasn't here, she was. The sky over Kandahar was the color of old iron, clouds hanging low enough to taste. Alara Voss flew beneath them, her A-10 Thunderbolt groaning through the thin air at 8,000 feet. The aircraft was ugly, blunt-nosed and graceless, built around a cannon that could spit depleted uranium rounds at a rate that sounded like a chainsaw tearing through steel. The Air Force called it the Warthog. The infantry called it Salvation. Voss called it hers. She'd been airborne for 90 minutes, running a patrol route along the Pakistani border when the distress call came through. Now she was heading east alone, into a valley the brass had marked red on every tactical map. No-fly meant no-fly. It meant the terrain was too tight, the enemy too entrenched, the risk of friendly fire too high. It meant you waited for Apache gunships or you called in artillery or you didn't go at all. But Apache were 30 minutes out. Artillery couldn't reach. And the men in that valley didn't have 30 minutes. Voss keyed her radio. Viper 2-1, Hog 1-7, I'm 12 miles out, give me a sitrep. Holloway's voice crackled back, tighter now. Hog, we've got approximately 75 to 100 enemy fighters in the rocks above us. They're dug in, firing RPGs and heavy machine guns. We've got no cover and no way to move. Mortars are dropping every 30 seconds. We've got 4 wounded, 2 critical. Voss's jaw tightened. 75 fighters. Dug in, that wasn't a skirmish, that was a kill box. Copy, Viper, what's your mark? We're dropping purple smoke in 5 seconds. The enemy's north, northwest, and west of our position. Danger close, Hog, we're talking 50 meters. 50 meters. That was nothing. That was breathing distance. 1 degree off her gun run and she'd be putting 30mm rounds into American bodies. She toggled her weapons panel, felt the familiar hum of the GAU-8 cannon cycling online. 7 barrels, 4,000 rounds per minute, each one the size of a beer bottle. Viper, understand danger close. I'll make 1 pass to identify targets. Hold your smoke until I call for it. Roger, Hog, appreciate you coming. Voss didn't answer. Appreciation was for after. Right now she was running calculations. Airspeed, altitude, wind shear off the mountain face. The valley would funnel the air, make her corrections harder. She'd have to come in low, slower than she liked, and she'd have to be perfect. The clouds began to break apart as she approached, and through the gaps she saw it, a scar of brown earth between two ridgelines narrow as a hallway. Smoke rose in thin columns from a dozen points. She saw muzzle flashes winking like fireflies in the rocks, and at the center, pressed into a depression barely large enough to hold them, she saw the soldiers. 37 men. One valley, no room for error. Voss dropped the nose of the warthog and descended. The altimeter spun backward, 7,000 feet, 6,000. The mountains rose on either side, jagged teeth of stone that seemed to close in as she flew deeper into the valley. Her heads-up display painted the terrain in green lines and red threat markers. She ignored them. Numbers didn't matter. Only the ground mattered. Only the men. She banked left, wings tilting steep, and got her first real look at the battlefield. The Taliban had chosen their position well. They occupied the high ground on three sides, hidden among boulders and scraggly pines, their heavy machine guns mounted on improvised tripods. She saw the glint of RPG tubes, the scatter of spent shell casings. And below, in the dirt, she saw the American position. It was worse than she'd imagined. They were completely exposed, huddled in a shallow depression that offered no real cover. A few of them were returning fire with rifles, but it was desperate, scattered. Most were just trying to stay alive. Voss climbed back to 6,000 feet and keyed her radio. "Viper Hog 17, I've got eyes on. Confirm you're in the depression at grid Whiskey 7943. Confirmed, Hog, that's us. Copy. Drop your smoke now." 3 seconds later, a plume of purple smoke erupted from the center of the American position, spreading in the wind. Voss locked it into her targeting system and began to map the enemy emplacements. North ridge, 2 machine gun nests. Northwest, a cluster of fighters behind a rock outcrop. West, a mortar team reloading behind a fallen tree. She could hit them all, but she'd have to do it in sequence, one pass at a time, and each pass would give them a chance to shoot back. The Warthog was armored, built to take punishment, but it wasn't invincible. One lucky RPG, one well-aimed burst from a 50 cal, and she'd be swimming home. "Viper, I'm making my first run on the North Ridge. Guns only, keep your heads down." "Roger, Hog, we're down." Voss nosed over and dove. The earth rushed up at her, fast and silent. She armed the cannon, felt the weight of it through the stick. The targeting reticle settled on the first machine gun nest, a cluster of muzzle flashes and dark shapes behind sandbags. She squeezed the trigger. The Warthog shuddered. The cannon roared, a sound like the world splitting open, and the mountainside exploded in a line of fire and dust. She walked the rounds across the ridge, 2 seconds of fury, and when she pulled up, the machine gun nest was gone, just smoke and silence. "Viper, North Ridge is clear." Holloway's voice came back, breathless. "Good hits, Hog, good hits. We've still got heavy fire from the northwest." Voss climbed and banked, her eyes scanning the ridgeline. The Taliban fighters were reacting now, scrambling for new positions, training their weapons skyward. She saw tracer rounds arcing up toward her, slow and bright, but they fell short. The Warthog was too high, too fast. She rolled into a hard turn, felt the G-forces press her into the seat, and lined up her next run. Northwest. The rock outcrop. She counted at least a dozen fighters clustered there, some with rifles, some with RPGs. One of them was already raising a launcher, tracking her turn. She had maybe 10 seconds before he fired. She didn't wait. Voss shoved the stick forward and dove again, steeper this time, airspeed climbing past 300 knots. The targeting reticle drifted across the rocks, steadied, locked. She fired. The cannon tore into the outcrop, shredding stone and flesh alike. The RPG gunner disappeared in a spray of dust. The fighters behind him scattered, but there was nowhere to go. She walked the rounds left, right, left again, a textbook strafe, and when she pulled off, the outcrop was silent. "Northwest clear, Viper." "Copy, Hog, you're a goddamn artist." Voss didn't smile. She was already looking for the next target, the mortar team on the west side. They were the ones killing these men, dropping high-explosive rounds every 30 seconds with mechanical precision. She'd seen the craters, the fresh earth, the shrapnel scars. If she didn't take them out, it wouldn't matter how many riflemen she killed. But the mortar team was dug in behind a fallen tree, partially concealed by the terrain. She'd have to come in low, almost into the valley floor to get a clean shot. That meant flying straight into the remaining enemy fire. She checked her fuel. 40 minutes left, more than enough. She checked her ammunition. 3,000 rounds, plenty. She keyed the radio. Viper, I'm going after the mortars on your west side. This one's going to be close. If you've got smoke grenades, throw them between your position and the tree line. I need to see the separation. Roger Hogg, smoke out in 10 seconds. Voss waited. The seconds stretched. Then white smoke began to pour from the American position, a thick wall that drifted west on the breeze. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She nosed over one more time and committed to the run. The valley walls blurred past. The altimeter screamed warnings. She ignored it all, focused only on the tree, the shapes moving behind it, the glint of metal tubes. The targeting reticle settled. She fired. The world became noise and light. When she climbed out, the mortar team was gone. The silence that followed was almost unnatural. For the first time in 20 minutes, the valley was quiet. No gunfire, no explosions, just the low rumble of the Warthog's engines and the wind moving through the rocks. Voss climbed to 8,000 feet and circled, her eyes moving across the ridgelines. She counted 3 small groups of fighters retreating north, dragging their wounded, leaving their weapons behind. The rest were dead or hiding. She keyed her radio. Viper 2-1, Hog 1-7. I'm not seeing any more active threats. What's your status? There was a long pause. Then Holloway's voice came back and it was shaking. Hog, you just saved our lives. We're still taking head counts, but we're secure. We've got 2 urgent surgical and 2 priority medevac. Can you stay on station until the birds get here? Affirmative, Viper. I've got 30 minutes of fuel. I'm not going anywhere. Roger, thank you. Voss didn't respond. She just kept circling, her eyes on the valley, her hand on the stick. Below her, the soldiers were moving now, pulling the wounded into the center of the depression, setting up a casualty collection point. She saw one of them wave up at her, a small gesture barely visible. She didn't wave back, she just watched them treat the wounded, watched them secure the perimeter, watched them live. 15 minutes later, 2 Black Hawks appeared from the south, rotors thumping, and descended into the valley. Voss stayed high, covering them, until the last soldier was loaded aboard and the helicopters climbed back into the sky. Only then did she turn west, back toward base. The flight back was long and quiet. The sun was setting by the time she saw the airfield, a sprawl of runways and hangars in the desert. She entered the pattern, dropped her landing gear, and touched down smooth as silk. The Warthog rolled to a stop in front of the maintenance hangar, and Voss shut down the engines. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. Then she unstrapped, climbed down the ladder, and walked toward the operations building. She expected debriefing. She expected paperwork. What she didn't expect was Colonel Raymond Hatcher waiting for her in the hallway, his face carved from stone. Major Voss. His voice was flat. Sir, you violated a direct no-fly order. You entered a red zone without clearance. You put a multi-million-dollar aircraft at risk for a mission that wasn't yours to fly. Voss met his eyes. Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say? She thought about the men in that valley. She thought about Private Yusuf's legs, Sergeant Daines's chest, the smoke and the blood and the silence after. No, sir, she said. I don't. Hatcher stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Voss sat alone in a windowless room, recounting every detail of the mission to a pair of officers who took notes but said nothing. She described her approach, her weapon selection, her target identification, her fuel status. She answered every question with precision, her voice calm and level. When they asked why she'd violated the no-fly order, she told them the truth. Because men were dying and no one else was coming. They didn't react. They just wrote it down. When it was over, they dismissed her without comment. Voss walked out into the night, the desert air cool against her skin. The base was quiet, most of the personnel already in their racks. She walked past the mess hall, past the barracks, past the rows of aircraft parked on the tarmac. She didn't know where she was going. She just walked. Near the edge of the flight line, she found a place to sit, a low concrete barrier overlooking the runway. She sat down and stared out at the darkness. The stars were bright here, brighter than anywhere she'd ever been. She'd grown up in Oregon, in a small town where the sky was always gray and the rain never stopped. She joined the Air Force at 18, looking for something bigger, something that mattered. She'd found it in the cockpit of an A-10, in the roar of the cannon, in the knowledge that somewhere below her, people were alive because of what she did. But the Air Force hadn't seen it that way. They'd seen hesitation, caution. A pilot who double-checked her targets, who asked questions, who didn't fit the mold of the aggressive, fearless fighter jock. They'd given her the call sign hesitation after a training mission in Nevada where she'd aborted a gun run because she wasn't sure of her target identification. She'd been right to abort. The target had been friendly, but the name had stuck anyway, a quiet mockery that followed her from squadron to squadron. She'd stopped trying to shake it. Now she just flew. Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel. She turned and saw Captain Holloway walking toward her, his uniform dusty and stained, his face drawn with exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "Major Voss," she nodded. "Captain." "I wanted to thank you," Holloway said. "Personally, what you did today." He stopped, searching for words. "You didn't have to come. You could have waited for clearance, but you didn't. You came. And because of that, 37 men are going home." Voss looked down at her hands. "You don't have to thank me, Captain. It's my job." "No," Holloway said. "It's not. Your job was to follow orders. You chose to save us instead." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a patch, the unit insignia of the Viper Company. He held it out to her. "I want you to have this." Voss stared at the patch. It was worn and faded, the edges frayed from months in the field. A coiled viper on a field of desert tan, the motto stitched beneath it in black thread, "Strike first." She didn't take it. "I can't accept that, Captain." "Why not?" "Because I'm probably going to be court-martialed for what I did today." Holloway shook his head. "You won't be. I already filed my after-action report. I told them exactly what happened. I told them you saved our lives. And I told them that if they punish you for it, I'll take it to every reporter, every congressman, every grunt with a blog who will listen. You're not going down for this, not on my watch." Voss looked up at him. His eyes were hard, but there was something else there too, gratitude, respect. She reached out and took the patch. "Thank you, Captain," he nodded. "Thank you, Major." He turned and walked away, back toward the barracks. Voss sat alone again, holding the patch in her hands. She traced the outline of the Viper with her thumb, felt the rough texture of the stitching. She thought about the valley, about the smoke and the fire and the silence, about the men who were alive because she'd made a choice. She thought about Colonel Hatcher's face, about the officers in the debriefing room, about the weight of the no-fly order she'd broken. She didn't regret it, not for a second, but she knew there would be consequences. There always were. The next morning she was summoned to the operations center. Colonel Hatcher was waiting for her, along with a brigadier general she didn't recognize. The general was an older man, gray-haired and stern, with rows of ribbons on his chest. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Major." Voss sat. The general leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I've read Captain Holloway's report. I've also read the reports from the other soldiers in that valley. 37 men, all of them alive, all of them crediting you with their survival. That's impressive." "Thank you, sir." "But you violated a direct order." "Yes, sir." The general nodded slowly. "Colonel Hatcher wants you grounded. He thinks you're a liability. He thinks you're reckless." Voss said nothing. The general continued. "I disagree. I think you're exactly the kind of pilot we need. Someone who can think under pressure, someone who can make the hard calls, someone who puts the mission and the men first, even when it costs them." He slid a folder across the table. "I'm not grounding you, Major. I'm giving you a commendation, and I'm recommending you for promotion to lieutenant colonel." Voss stared at the folder, unable to speak. The general stood. "Keep flying, Major, and keep saving lives." He walked out, leaving her alone with Hatcher. The colonel's face was unreadable. "You got lucky, Voss," he said quietly. "Don't make me regret this." The weeks that followed were strange. Voss returned to her regular patrol routes, flying the same endless loops over the same empty desert, but something had changed. Word had spread. The story of the valley, of the 37 men, of the A-10 pilot who defied orders to save them. It moved through the base like wildfire, whispered in mess halls and briefing rooms, embellished with each retelling. Some of the stories were accurate, some weren't. But they all ended the same way. With Voss flying into a valley everyone said was impossible and coming out the other side. The other pilots treated her differently now. not with hostility but with a kind of wary respect. They asked her about the gun runs, about the targeting, about how she'd managed to avoid hitting the friendlies. She answered their questions, but she didn't enjoy the attention. She preferred the quiet, the routine, the simple act of flying. But the quiet didn't last. A week after the commendation, Voss was called to another mission briefing. This time the room was full. A dozen pilots, intelligence officers, ground commanders. At the front of the room, a map of eastern Afghanistan was projected on the wall, a red circle drawn around a cluster of villages near the border. The briefing officer, a major named Torrance, pointed to the circle. "Gentlemen, and Major Voss, this is Operation Iron Shield. We've got intelligence indicating a high-value target is operating out of this area. A Taliban commander responsible for multiple IED attacks on coalition forces. Our job is to support a joint special operations raid to capture or kill him." He clicked to the next slide. A photograph of a bearded man in his 40s, dark eyes staring directly at the camera. This is Abdul Rashid Khan, former Mujahideen, current Taliban regional commander. He's smart, well-funded, and he's got about 50 fighters under his command. The raid goes in at 0400 tomorrow. We'll have 2 teams on the ground, call signs Sabre and Dagger. Close air support will be provided by 2 Apache and 1 A-10. Torrance looked directly at Voss. "Major, you'll be the fixed-wing asset. Your job is to loiter at altitude and provide fire support if the teams make contact. Rules of engagement are strict. No civilian casualties. No collateral damage. You fire only when cleared by the ground commander. Understood?" "Understood, sir." The briefing continued for another hour, covering contingencies, fallback plans, medevac procedures. When it ended, the pilots filed out, but Voss stayed behind. She studied the map, memorizing the terrain, the roads, the elevation contours. The villages were clustered in a river valley, surrounded by hills and farmland. It was open ground, which was good for the helicopters but bad for the ground teams. If the raid went sideways, there wouldn't be much cover. Torrance noticed her staring. "Something on your mind, Major?" "Just thinking about the terrain, sir. If the teams get pinned down, it's going to be hard to provide effective support without risking civilian structures." "That's why you're the A-10 pilot, Voss. Precision is the name of the game." She nodded, but didn't feel reassured. At 3 in the morning, Voss was in the cockpit, running through her pre-flight checks. The Warthog sat on the tarmac under harsh floodlights, its skin scarred and patched from 100 missions. The ground crew had reloaded the cannon, topped off the fuel tanks, and inspected every rivet and panel. It was ready. So was she. She strapped in, powered up the systems, and taxied to the runway. The 2 Apache were already airborne, their lights blinking in the darkness as they headed east. Voss followed, lifting off smoothly and climbing into the pre-dawn sky. The flight to the target area took 40 minutes. By the time she arrived, the sun was just beginning to rise, a faint glow on the horizon. Below her, the villages were dark and quiet, smoke rising from a few early cooking fires. She could see the river snaking through the valley, the patchwork of fields and dirt roads. It looked peaceful. She climbed to 12,000 feet and began her orbit. The Apache were lower, circling at 3,000, their thermal cameras sweeping the ground. On the radio, the ground commander's voice was calm and professional. "All stations, Sabre 6, we are infill complete and moving to the objective. Stand by." Voss acknowledged and settled in to wait. The minutes crawled by. She watched the sun climb higher, watched the villages wake up, women carrying water, children playing in the dirt, farmers heading out to the fields. Normal life. Then the radio crackled. "All stations, Sabre 6, we've got eyes on the target building. Dagger is moving to the south side. Stand by for breach." Voss's hand moved to the weapons panel, her eyes on the village below. She couldn't see the soldiers from this altitude, but she knew where they were. A cluster of buildings on the north edge of the village, mud brick structures with flat roofs and narrow alleys. The target building was the largest one, 2 stories with a walled courtyard. "Sabre 6, Dagger 1, we're in position." "Roger, Dagger, breach in 3, 2, 1, breach, breach, breach." For 10 seconds there was silence. Then the radio exploded with noise, gunfire, shouting, the sharp crack of flashbangs. Voss's heart rate spiked, but her hand stayed steady. Contact, contact, we've got multiple armed fighters in the courtyard, taking fire from the upper windows. Dagger 1, we're moving to support. Wait, we've got more fighters coming from the east. Say again, multiple fighters moving toward the objective from the east side of the village. The Apache dove, their miniguns roaring. Voss could see the tracers now, streaks of red cutting through the dawn. She keyed her radio. Saber 6, Hog 17, I'm standing by for tasking. Hog, stand by. Shit, we've got a technical inbound armed with a 50 cal coming down the main road from the west. Can you engage? Voss rolled her aircraft, scanning the road. There. A white pickup truck speeding toward the village, a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. 2 fighters visible. Saber 6, I've got eyes on the technical. Engaging now. Voss nosed over and dove. The Warthog screamed down through 10,000 feet, the airspeed needle climbing. She armed the cannon, let the targeting reticle settle on the speeding truck. It was moving fast, kicking up a cloud of dust, the machine gunner in the back swiveling his weapon toward the village. She waited until the reticle turned red. Fired. The cannon roared for 2 seconds. The truck exploded in a ball of flame and twisted metal, cartwheeling off the road and into a ditch. The machine gun went silent. Saber 6, technical destroyed. Good hit, Hog, stand by, we've got more targets. The radio went chaotic. Multiple voices overlapping, urgent. Dagger 1, we're taking heavy fire from the rooftops. Saber 6, we need immediate suppression on the buildings to the north. Apache 2, I've got eyes on an RPG team setting up in the alley, engaging now. Voss climbed and banked, her eyes scanning the village. The buildings were too close together, the alleys too narrow. The Apache were doing their job, their rockets slamming into enemy positions, but the Taliban fighters were everywhere, pouring out of houses, taking up positions on rooftops and behind walls. The ground teams were trapped in the courtyard, unable to advance or retreat. She could see muzzle flashes from a dozen different points. This was bad. She keyed her radio. Saber 6, Hog 17. I can provide fire support, but I need clear targets. What do you need? Hog, we've got fighters on the rooftops of the buildings north of the objective. They're the ones pinning us down. Can you hit them without taking out the whole structure? Voss scanned the buildings. Flat roofs, mud brick. Fighters moving between them, rifles and machine guns blazing. Hitting the rooftops without collapsing the buildings was possible, but it would take precision. One mistake and she'd bring the whole thing down on top of civilians who might be sheltering inside. Saber 6, I can do it. But I need you to mark the objective building with IR strobes. I need to know exactly where you are. Roger, Hog, strobes coming on now. Voss toggled her night vision system, and suddenly the courtyard was lit up with infrared markers, 4 bright stars visible only through her optics. She locked them into her system and began her run. The targeting reticle moved across the rooftops. She picked the first building, saw 2 fighters crouched behind a low wall, firing down into the courtyard. She adjusted her angle shallower than usual and squeezed the trigger. The cannon walked across the rooftop in a tight line, shredding the wall and everything behind it. The fighters disappeared. The building stood. Target destroyed. Saber 6. Roger, Hog, next building, same side. Voss banked and came around again. Another rooftop. 3 fighters this time. She fired, pulled off, climbed. The pattern repeated. Target, fire, climb. Target, fire, climb. Each run was a gamble, each burst of cannon fire a calculated risk. But the buildings held and the fighters didn't. After the 6th run, the radio traffic began to change. The panic was gone, replaced by something steadier. The ground teams were moving again, pushing through the courtyard, clearing rooms. The Apache pilots reported fewer targets, fewer threats. The tide was turning. Voss climbed back to 8,000 feet and circled, her fuel gauge dropping into the yellow. She had maybe 15 minutes before she'd need to head back to base. She hoped it was enough. Saber 6, Dagger 1, we've got the target. I repeat, we have Abdul Rashid Khan in custody. We're moving to exfil now. Roger, Dagger, Apache 1, can you cover the exfil route? Affirm, Saber, we've got eyes on, no threats visible. Voss allowed herself a breath. They'd done it. The mission was over. The soldiers were moving out of the village now, carrying their prisoner, moving fast toward the landing zone where the Black Hawks would pick them up. She watched them go, watched the Apache escort them, watched the village fall silent behind them. Then the radio crackled. All stations, this is Apache 2. I've got movement on the south edge of the village. Multiple personnel, possibly armed, heading toward the exfil route. Voss's eyes snapped to the south. She saw them. A group of fighters, maybe 10 or 12, moving through the fields with weapons. They were trying to cut off the soldiers before they reached the landing zone. Sabre 6, Hog 17, I've got eyes on the group. Permission to engage. There was a pause. Then, negative, Hog. Civilian structures are too close. Hold fire unless they engage our teams. Voss bit back her frustration. The fighters were in the open now, moving fast. If they reached the soldiers before the helicopters arrived, people were going to die. She watched them close the distance. 200 meters, 150. The soldiers were moving as fast as they could, but they were burdened with gear and a prisoner. They weren't going to make it. Sabre 6, Hog 17. Those fighters are going to reach you in less than a minute. Recommend I engage now. Negative, Hog, wait for them to fire first. 100 meters. Voss's hand hovered over the trigger. She could see the fighters raising their weapons. Could see the soldiers turning to face them, taking defensive positions. She could end this right now. One burst, 2 seconds. Then the fighters opened fire. Contact rear, contact rear. All stations, Sabre 6. Hog, you are cleared hot. Engage the fighters south of our position. Voss didn't need to be told twice. She rolled the Warthog hard, nosed over, and dove. The fighters were spread out across the field, firing from the prone position. She armed the cannon, steadied her breathing, and fired. The field erupted, dust and fire and the scream of the GAU-8 tearing through the air. She walked the rounds across the line of fighters, left to right, and when she pulled off, the field was silent. Sabre 6, targets destroyed. Roger, Hog. Thanks for the save. Voss climbed and turned back toward base. Behind her, the Black Hawks landed, loaded the soldiers, and lifted off. Mission complete. The flight back was quiet. Voss's hands were steady on the stick, but her mind was racing. She kept replaying the mission in her head, analyzing every decision, every gun run. She'd done everything right, but it had still been close. Too close. If the fighters had been faster, if the soldiers had been slower, if she'd hesitated for even a second, the outcome would have been different. When she landed, the sun was fully up, the base already buzzing with activity. She taxied to the hangar, shut down the engines, and climbed out. The ground crew chief, a sergeant named Maldonado, was waiting for her with a grin. Hell of a mission, Major. Word is you shredded half a village. Voss shook her head. I hit the targets. The village is fine. Yeah, well, the guys on the ground don't see it that way. They're calling you a guardian angel. Voss didn't respond. She walked toward the operations building, her flight suit stiff with dried sweat. She was halfway there when she heard someone call her name. She turned and saw a man in civilian clothes walking toward her. Tall, late 30s with a press badge clipped to his shirt. A reporter. She stopped, wary. Major Voss, I'm David Keller, freelance journalist. I've been covering special operations in Afghanistan. I heard about your mission today. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions. I don't do interviews. I understand, but the story I'm working on isn't about you. It's about the soldiers you've been supporting, the men who,